Will fasting help a healthy person live longer? What are the keys to a successful fast? Do we know the actual differences between time-restricted feeding, intermittent fasting, and dietary restriction, and how they can be used to attack the root cause of T2D, metabolic syndrome, and obesity? Jason Fung, nephrologist and best-selling author, shares his experiences utilizing an individualized approach to fasting to successfully treat thousands of overweight, metabolically ill, and diabetic patients, and why being a doctor who specializes in kidney disease gives him a unique insight into early indications of metabolic disease. Let's listen to Dr. Jason Fung.
Because this is the thing. So suppose you have somebody who is overweight, obese, and type 2 diabetic. So they have too much body fat and they have too much blood glucose. In fact, their whole body actually is full of glucose. And that's the whole problem, right? Their sugars are high and they've got too much body fat. So the question is, why do they want to eat? Why doesn't their body simply shut down their appetite and say, okay, you shouldn't eat anymore, you should burn off this fat because you're too fat. And this goes back to what we were saying, which is that the being too fat is actually not good from an evolutionary standpoint. So there's actually a hormone called leptin, which was discovered, 20 years ago, which actually does this exact same thing. So if you have too much fat, your fat cells, your adipocytes, will actually send out a hormone called leptin, which tells you to stop eating. So whenever you look at these overfeeding experiments, so if you take somebody and you force them to eat, what happens is that they can gain weight, but only temporarily. And it's just, it's the mirror image is the weight loss. You can lose weight, but only temporarily. And it's because as they start to gain more and more weight, their fat cells become sort of bigger, and then they send out a lot of leptin, which goes to the brain and turns off that appetite. So as long as you force them to eat, they gain weight. As soon as you stop forcing them to eat, they actually lose all that weight. And this was first demonstrated in the 1960s by this endocrinologist called Ethan Sims. And it's instructive because it shows how the body tries to maintain this sort of set weight. That is to say, he took some rats and he tried to make them fat. He gave them a lot of food, but he didn't really force them to eat, and none of the rats got fat. And then he tried it with humans, thinking, okay, this will be easy. Just tell them to eat lots of stuff and then they'll gain weight. Turns out it wasn't that easy after all. And that's the effect of this leptin. So then the question is, why doesn't leptin work in obesity? And it's really because the body has become resistant to the leptin. So then the question is, why is there this leptin resistance? That is, somebody who is overweight has big fat cells. The fat cells are pumping out a lot of leptin, but the body's not responding appropriately because it's not shutting down the appetite, which would happen. That is, if I was to take Zach, force feed him and make him gain 30 pounds. As soon as I stop force feeding him, his leptin would shut off his appetite. He'd basically eat very little for the next month, and then he'd go back to his original weight. And this is effortless. This is completely effortless because you're working with your hormones. And it's because there's this sort of fight going on between insulin and leptin. So if you stimulate insulin, you're going to stimulate eating and storage of body fat, and then the fat is going to go to leptin, which is going to try and turn off your appetite. So if you turn off the appetite, you don't eat as much, insulin goes down, and that's supposed to correct itself. If all of a sudden you start eating a lot of highly processed foods, that is, very insulinogenic foods, and eating those foods all the time, because now we've been trained to eat sort of 6 times a day, you're stimulating insulin all the time. That means you get a lot of leptin, and that high persistent levels of leptin just lead to a lot of leptin resistance, which is why you have this obesity. So the primary problem is this sort of constant stimulation by insulin, the insulin resistance, which is, again, keeps that insulin level high, but it's related a lot to the fructose. The fructose goes to the liver, and, Dr. Lustig talks about this a lot. It goes to the liver, causes fatty liver and insulin resistance. So that's why your leptin doesn't work, and that's why the appetite gets so deranged, because in a normal functioning system, it should absolutely turn off. But now the problem is insulin. So now you say, okay, now you have a metabolically deranged thing. You've had too much insulin for too long, which has led to too much leptin for too long, which has led to leptin resistance. If you understand that, then you say, okay, well, the primary problem was the insulin. Let's drop the insulin. So you can do things like intermittent fasting, ketogenic diets, that kind of thing. In the case of what you do, Sean, which is just a lot of meat, it's fine because that meat activates these natural satiety mechanisms, right? And we know these things, CCK and peptide YY, so that you don't have to eat because you're not hungry. But your system is not sort of in that 10 years of hyperinsulinemia, 20 years of hyperinsulinemia. You haven't been, on that. And these foods are sort of natural. There's a natural sort of balance with these foods that naturally resist obesity. And that's why when you go back to pictures from the 60s and 70s, it's crazy because people look actually really, really thin. And nobody was trying to lose weight and nobody was watching what they ate. But they didn't eat all the time. And that was the real key.